Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. I'm glad you're here, because today's story is one that's going to stay with you for a while. Not because of the amount of money involved, though there was money, there's always money, but because of how close this one came to going a completely different direction. We're talking about the difference between one outcome and another being a single sentence spoken in a moving car. A sentence that wasn't meant for him. Our man today is Niall Connolly, 59 years old, retired heavy equipment mechanic from Limerick, Ireland, 30 years diagnosing what was wrong with machines the size of houses. If something was broken, Niall could find it. He's the kind of man who doesn't say much, doesn't waste words, and doesn't make decisions without thinking them through first. He came to Cebu, Philippines, not chasing anything specific. That's what he'll tell you. He had his reasons for leaving Ireland, and they're the kind of reasons that'll make sense to anyone who's ever lost someone they built their whole life around. He arrived careful, he arrived sensible, and he met someone who seemed, for all the world, to be exactly what she appeared to be. What happened over the next 7 months is something Niall has thought about every day since, and he agreed to come on Inside the Philippines to tell you the whole thing, because he reckons if one person hears it and makes a different decision, it was worth the telling. Here's his story, in his own words. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm some kind of Egypt. I want to get that out front. 59 years old, 30 years as a heavy equipment mechanic on civil engineering sites across Ireland and the UK, I have spent my working life figuring out what's wrong with things. Excavators, bulldozers, cranes, you name it. You learn to listen. You learn that machines tell you the truth if you pay attention. And the ones that don't make noise when they should are often the most dangerous. So I'm not an Egypt. I just want to be clear about that, because the rest of what I'm going to tell you might make me sound like one. My wife Maread died 7 years ago, Tuesday morning in February. I came downstairs and she was already gone. No warning, no build-up, nothing. 54 years old, and fit as a fiddle, and then just not there. Heart attack, they said, as if naming it explained anything at all. We'd been married 26 years, had the house in Limerick, had the kids, Sinead in Cork, Ciaran in London, had the routines, the Sunday dinners, the way she'd have the radio on in the kitchen every morning. All of it. Gone on a Tuesday. And here's the thing about me. The thing you need to understand about who I am before any of the rest of this makes sense. I deal with problems by fixing them. That's not a personality. That's a reflex. 30 years of it. Something's wrong. You find the fault. You repair the fault. You move on. The job gets done. Grief doesn't work like that. I couldn't find the fault because there wasn't one to find. And I couldn't fix what happened because there's no fixing it. So I did the next best thing, which is what men like me do when we can't fix something. I managed it. Competently. I paid the bills on time. I visited the kids at Christmas. I kept the house clean. I went through the motions the way a machine runs on autopilot. Everything functioning, nobody home. 5 years of that. 6 years. 7. The house in Limerick started to feel less like somewhere I lived, and more like a monument. Every room was still her. I couldn't rearrange the kitchen without it feeling wrong. Couldn't repaint the front bedroom. Couldn't do anything to the place, because doing anything to the place would be changing it. And changing it would be admitting she wasn't coming back. Which I knew. I'm not daft. I knew she wasn't coming back. But knowing something and feeling it are two different bits of machinery entirely. And they don't always connect. So eventually, I sold the house. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't fix what was wrong with it. And when I can't fix something, I have to walk away before it takes me with it. The kids thought I was being hasty, Maybe I was. I had a bit of money from the sale, a bit set aside from the years of working, and I had a state pension that would keep the basics covered. I wasn't wealthy, but I wasn't desperate. I had options. I just had no idea what to do with them. I found the Philippines the way I suspect a lot of men my age found it. Late nights, can't sleep, YouTube, playing on the laptop. You start with one video about retirement in Southeast Asia, and 2 hours later you're watching some lad walk around a market in Cebu explaining how he lives on €1,100 a month, including rent. I watched those videos for weeks, not because I was planning anything, more because they were there and I wasn't sleeping anyway. I'd thought about Spain. Went to the Costa del Sol once years ago with a lad from work. Spent a week surrounded by other Irish people eating full Irish breakfasts and drinking Guinness and complaining about the price of Guinness. It wasn't really abroad, you know what I mean? It was just Ireland in the sun with worse plumbing. The Philippines was different, genuinely different. The language, the culture, the geography, proper islands, proper ocean, and the people in the videos seemed, I don't know how to put this without it sounding patronizing, which isn't how I mean it. They seemed warm, actually warm, not hospitality industry warm. The kind of warmth that looks real because it is. I booked 4 weeks in Cebu, told Sinead I was having a holiday. She worried, because she always worries, and I told her it was fine. I'd looked into it. I had a hotel sorted. I flew out in January, changed in Doha, landed at Mactan Cebu International, into heat that hit me like opening a furnace door. January in Limerick is grey and wet, and about 8 degrees if you're lucky. Cebu in January is 32, with humidity you could wring out. I took a grab to the hotel near Ayala, spent 40 minutes sitting on the bed in the air conditioning, working up the nerve to go outside. Which is not something I'd normally admit to, but there you go. The first 4 days I ate at the same 2 places, within walking distance of the hotel. There was a carinderia, a kind of local canteen, around the corner from the back of the mall, run by a woman who never once looked surprised to see a pale Irishman ordering rice for breakfast. The food was good. Cheap. I had no idea what most of it was, and she didn't offer explanations, and I didn't ask for them. That suited us both. I was a bit lost, if I'm honest. Not dangerously lost, just the ordinary kind of lost that happens when you're 59 years old and eating rice in a country where you don't speak the language, and you're not entirely sure why you came or what you expected to find here. On the 5th day, I went into Ayala Mall to sort out an island-hopping trip I'd seen mentioned in one of the YouTube videos. There was a tour kiosk near the ground floor entrance, one of those little booths with laminated photographs of beaches and dive sites. A woman behind the counter, professional, not pushy, going through some paperwork when I walked up. That was Rowena. She looked up when I approached and said, "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" No smile pasted on, no aggressive sales manner. Just straightforward, like someone who actually worked for a living and had things to get back to. I told her I wanted to do the island hopping. The one with the sardine run at Moalboal, maybe? Or the sandbar at Camotes. I'd seen both mentioned online. She asked me how many days I had, whether I got seasick, whether I preferred smaller private bancas or the bigger tourist boats. Practical questions. She was assessing the job, same as I would. We settled on a 2-day trip, Moalboal first, then across to Malapascua the following week if I wanted. She wrote everything down on a booking form, explained the pickup time, told me to bring cash for the banca operators, and not to pay anything extra if they asked for it on the water. She said that last part matter-of-factly, like she was giving me useful information rather than trying to impress me. I appreciated that. I paid the deposit, 2,500 pesos, about 40 euros. And that was that. 5 minutes, done. I was nearly out the door when she mentioned the sunscreen, said the reflection off the water around Moalboal was brutal, and that Irish skin, she'd guessed, apparently, from the accent, would not thank me for underestimating it. I told her I'd be grand. She gave me a look that suggested she'd heard that before. 2 days later, I came back sunburned in the specific and impressive way that only very pale people in tropical countries manage. I walked past the kiosk, and she saw me and laughed. Not at me exactly. More like she'd expected this outcome and found the confirmation mildly satisfying. I stopped and told her she'd been right about the sunscreen. She said she knew. That was, I think, the moment. Not romantic, nothing like that. Just, she treated me like a normal person, not a Kano with a wallet, not a tourist to be processed. She laughed at me the way someone laughs at a friend who's done something predictably daft. And I cannot explain to you how much I had missed being treated like a normal person. We talked for maybe 20 minutes while she was on her break. She drank a small cup of black coffee, and I had a San Miguel from the convenience stall nearby, which is not really a midday drink, but there you go. She told me about the job. She'd been running the kiosk for 3 years, had worked in a hotel in Mactan before that. She had a daughter, Jasmine, 11 years old, in school in Mandaue. Her marriage had ended. She said this plainly and without drama, and her annulment was ongoing. She explained what annulment meant in the Philippines, that there was no divorce, that the process took years and cost a lot, and that she was partway through it. She said this early and clearly. I filed it as honesty. I asked what her ex-husband did. She said he worked construction in Riyadh now, sent money for Jasmine sometimes, not always. She didn't say it with bitterness, just as a fact about the situation, like describing the weather. I didn't ask her anything else personal. Didn't feel right. We talked about Cebu instead. She told me which parts of Colon Street to avoid at night. Recommended a turo-turo near the South Bus Terminal if I wanted to try proper Cebuano food rather than the tourist versions. She said the kare-kare at one of the canteens near Carbon Market was worth the smell of the market to get there. She was giving me genuine information. Nobody does that unless they're at least partly real. Her break ended, and she went back to the kiosk and I walked back to the hotel. That was it. But I went back the next day. Said I had a question about the Malapascua trip. I did have a question, technically. It wasn't really the reason I went back. We talked again. And the day after that. By the end of the second week, she was showing me parts of Cebu I wouldn't have found from any YouTube video. A weekend market off Osmeña Boulevard where local artists sold their work. A small church in the Parian district that was 400 years old and completely unremarkable looking from the outside. A Mang Inasal near her place in Labangan, where the grilled chicken came on banana leaf and cost 89 pesos, about €1.40, and was better than anything I'd eaten in a restaurant. We sat across from each other in that Mang Inasal on a Tuesday afternoon, and I ate chicken I couldn't identify half the parts of and drank a Red Horse because it was cold. And I thought, this is the first time in 7 years I've sat somewhere and not been performing the act of being fine. She never asked me for anything. Not once. Not a hint of it. I want you to understand what that meant to me at the time, because it's the center of everything that comes after. I had read the forums. I knew the stories. Bar girls, G-cash requests on day 2, fake emergencies, the whole architecture of it. I was not naive about the existence of this. I had gone to the Philippines with my eyes open, or so I thought. And Rowena had a job. Rowena had a daughter with a real school in a real suburb. Rowena's annulment had paperwork she mentioned in passing. Rowena made fun of my sunburn. Rowena told me which streets to avoid. She didn't need anything from me, and showed no signs of wanting anything from me. And that, I told myself, was the difference. That was how you knew. At the end of week 4, I was supposed to fly home. I'd booked it that way. 4 weeks. Sensible. Don't go mad. I sat in the hotel room the night before and looked at the booking on my phone for a long time. Then I looked at the Ryanair website. Then I called the hotel front desk and asked if they had availability for another 2 weeks. They did. I told Sinead I'd extended the holiday because Cebu had more to see. Which was true. That wasn't the only reason, but it was true. I told myself the same thing. Also true. Also not the whole story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The extra 2 weeks. Right. I want to be precise about what those 2 weeks were, because it matters for understanding what came after. It wasn't a romance. Not yet. We weren't a couple. There was no declaration of anything. We were 2 people who got on reasonably well, spending time together in a city that was foreign to one of us and ordinary to the other. And the ordinary thing felt like a gift I hadn't expected. She took me to the Basilica Minore del Santo Niño on a Sunday morning. I'm not a religious man. I was raised Catholic the way most Irish of my generation were raised Catholic, which is to say, I went through the motions until I didn't. But there was something about that church that stopped me. The oldest church in the Philippines, she told me, built in the 1500s, and there were people praying in it with the kind of complete unself-conscious attention that I'd never managed in a church, even when I believed more than I do now. Rowena lit a candle. She did it quietly, didn't make a performance of it. I stood beside her and said nothing, and she didn't seem to expect me to say anything. On the way out, she told me she prayed for Jasmine every Sunday. For her health, her studies, her future. Said it the way she said most things, plainly, without expecting a reaction. I told her that seemed like a reasonable thing to pray for. She smiled at that. I met Jasmine the following Saturday. We went to SM City Cebu. Rowena needed to get her something from National Bookstore, school supplies, and the girl was already there waiting outside when we arrived. 11 years old, neat in a school polo shirt even though it was the weekend, carrying a small backpack. She shook my hand when Rowena introduced us. Actually shook it. Proper handshake. Looked me in the eye, said, "Good afternoon, sir," and then went slightly pink with shyness. I found this completely charming, and managed not to say so. We ate at the Jollibee on the ground floor. Jasmine ordered a chicken joy with rice, and ate it with the focused efficiency of someone who'd earned it. She asked me 2 questions across the whole meal. What was Ireland like? And did we have Jollibee there? I told her Ireland was cold and wet, and no, we did not have Jollibee, which she received as information about a place that had clearly made some poor decisions. Rowena caught my eye over the girl's head, and the look on her face was, I don't know. It was the look of a woman watching a child she loves very much behave exactly as expected, and finding it both ordinary and precious at the same time. My Rayad used to have that look. Different child, same look. I know I shouldn't have read as much into that as I did. I know that now. The 6 weeks ended, and I flew home. We'd exchanged numbers by then, messenger contacts, Rowena's Gcash details. She'd given me the Gcash, she said, in case I ever wanted to send something for Jasmine's school. Said it lightly, in passing, the same way you'd give someone a spare key and tell them it's there if they need it. No weight to it. She didn't ask me to use it. I used it within 2 weeks of landing in Limerick. The school fees had come due, she mentioned on a video call. Not as a request. She mentioned it the way you mention a bill that exists. A fact of life. Part of the ongoing overhead of raising a child alone. The amount was 18,000 pesos. About 295 euros. I said I'd send something, and she said I didn't have to, and I said I knew that, and transferred it anyway. Took me about 4 minutes on my phone. I went to bed that night feeling useful. That's the honest word for it. Useful. I hadn't felt useful to anyone in a very long time, and the feeling of it was, I don't know how to explain this without it sounding pathetic, but I'll try. When you spend 30 years solving mechanical problems, you have a function. You arrive somewhere, something is broken, and when you leave it works. That is a satisfying thing to be. After Maria died, I had no function. The kids were grown. The house was just a house. My pension arrived whether I did anything or not. Sending that 18,000 pesos was the first time in years I'd solved a problem that mattered to a specific person who needed it solved. That's the part one should have examined more carefully. Didn't. We video called 3 or 4 times a week. Messenger, usually in the evenings, her time, early afternoon mine. She'd be in her small apartment in Labangan. Jasmine, sometimes visible in the background, doing homework at a table. The calls weren't dramatic. We talked about ordinary things. What she'd cooked for dinner. What was happening on my end. Nothing in particular. The karaoke from the neighbors bled through her walls sometimes. She'd apologize for it. I'd tell her it was fine. It was fine. It was familiar. 3 weeks after the school fees, she mentioned uniforms. Jasmine's school had specific requirements. Polo shirts, a particular pair of shoes, 12,000 pesos, about 195 euros. I transferred it the same day she mentioned it. Again, she hadn't quite asked. She'd mentioned. I'd moved quickly. I think about that now. The mechanism of it. How she never quite asked, and I never quite waited to be asked. I was so intent on proving to myself that I wasn't being manipulated, that I was choosing to give freely because I could, that I didn't notice I was being led to each choice in sequence. Like a man walking a well-laid path, who's pleased with himself for having the good sense to stay on it, not realizing the path was built for him. I told nobody in Ireland any of this. Not Sinead, not Ciaran, not a single former workmate. Part of that was because I knew what it would sound like. Part of it was because naming it out loud would have required me to examine it. And I wasn't ready to examine it yet. I was in the middle of feeling something that resembled being alive again, and I wasn't going to poke at it while it was happening. By the time I'd been home 2 months, I'd sent 30,000 pesos total. Just under 500 euros. Against what I had in the bank, it was nothing. I knew it was nothing. I kept telling myself it was nothing, which, I have since come to understand, is not a neutral thing to tell yourself. By the start of the 2nd month back in Ireland, the arrangement had settled into a shape. I don't know exactly when it became an arrangement. There was no conversation where we agreed to anything. No moment where she asked, and I said yes. It just became the pattern, the way a machine finds its operating rhythm. 25,000 pesos a month, about 410 euros at the rates then, into her GCash account, first week of the month, regular as a direct debit. She never framed it as an expectation. That's important to say. She'd send a message after it arrived. Something brief, always grateful, sometimes a photo of Jasmine with a new school book or a plate of food she'd cooked, some ordinary evidence of life continuing. The gratitude felt real. I believed it was real. I still think it probably was, in its way. The two things, being genuinely grateful and systematically working you. are not as mutually exclusive as you'd hope. I told myself it was no different from what a relationship costs at home. And that was true, technically. Take a woman in Limerick out for a meal, a few drinks, the usual. You'd spend that in a month without thinking. This was just structured differently. More practical. I'm a practical man. This felt like the practical version of caring about someone. What I didn't examine, because I didn't want to, was the asymmetry of it. She knew exactly what was coming and when. I had no corresponding certainty about anything. The third month was when her mother came up. Rowena had mentioned her mother before. She lived in a small house in the province. Bohol, older woman, lived alone since Rowena's father died years ago. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Rowena was upset in a way I hadn't seen before. Controlled, but you could hear it. Her mother needed a cataract operation. Both eyes affected. Her vision was getting bad. She'd been managing, but now it was becoming a problem. The surgeon at the hospital in Tagbilaran had given them a figure, 60,000 pesos for the procedure. About 980 euros. She said she was sorry to mention it. Said she didn't know what she was going to do, that she'd been trying to save. But with Jasmine's school and the rent and everything else, she just didn't have it. She wasn't asking me directly. She was just telling me. The way you tell someone about a problem. I transferred the money within the hour. Didn't hesitate. Didn't sleep on it. Didn't ask a single question about the hospital or the surgeon or the diagnosis or the timeline. I just fixed it. Because that's what I do. That's the reflex. She cried, actually cried, on the video call. Said I didn't know how much it meant, that her mother would pray for me, that she didn't know how to thank me properly. I told her it was fine. I had it. It wasn't a problem. And it wasn't. 980 euros is not a sum that threatens a man with 155,000 euros in the bank. Mathematically, it's nothing. I've thought about that transaction a lot. Not because the money mattered, but because of how fast I moved. A mechanic does not replace a part without identifying why it failed. You don't just fix the symptom and move on without understanding what caused it, because the same fault will surface somewhere else, and next time it'll be worse. I knew this. 30 years of it, and I transferred 980 euros to a woman in Cebu without asking a single diagnostic question, because fixing something for her felt better than asking why it was broken. That's not her fault. That's mine. I did start reading more about the Philippines during this period. I'd been curious since the trip. The history, the colonial period, the Catholic Church, the way family works over there. I came across the concept of utang na loob properly for the first time. The debt of gratitude. The idea that when someone does something for you, you owe them, not in a transactional way, but in a deep, ongoing way that runs through everything. Families, communities, the whole structure of obligation. I read about it carefully, and I thought I understood it. I thought, this is why Rowena is so grateful. This is a real cultural thing, not performance. And the support I was sending wasn't just money to her, it was me becoming part of this system of mutual obligation, becoming someone she was bound to in the way her culture bound people to each other. I thought this understanding made me sophisticated. It made me feel like I wasn't just some Kano waving his pension around. I'd done the reading. I understood the nuance. What I hadn't grasped was that understanding a cultural mechanism is not the same as being protected from it. A man who knows how a hydraulic press works can still get his hand caught in one. It was around month 4 that I came across the forum post. I was on one of the Cebu expat Facebook groups, I'd joined a few of them, more out of curiosity than anything, just to get a feel for the landscape. The post was from a man who'd had a bad experience. He didn't name anyone, didn't post photos. He described a woman who worked at a tour kiosk in a mall in Cebu. Very professional, very warm, never asked for anything up front. Described the gradual pattern of support requests. Described how he'd eventually realized she had other foreign men in the same arrangement. I read it twice. The kiosk detail, the professional manner, the not asking, and I filed it as coincidence. Could be anywhere, could be anyone. The description fit half the tour operators in the city. There was no name, no photo, nothing specific enough to connect. I told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself that assuming it was Rowena on the basis of a vague forum post from a presumably bitter man would say more about my insecurities than about her character. I didn't bookmark the post. I kept scrolling. By month 5, I'd sent a total of approximately 280,000 pesos. The school fees, the uniforms, 5 months of the monthly transfer, the eye operation, which worked out to just over 4,500 euros. I knew the number exactly. I am a careful man with a spreadsheet, and I tracked every transfer. Against 155,000 euros, it was controlled, managed. The maths worked. I booked the return flight to Cebu. And on a Thursday afternoon in October, I stopped at Curran's Jewelers on O'Connell Street in Limerick. I'd walked past it hundreds of times over the years, and I went inside and bought a ring. White gold, simple band, a small stone, nothing flashy. Not the kind of ring that announces itself. The kind of ring that says, I made a decision. I didn't tell anyone. Not Sinead. Not Sieran. I put it in the inside pocket of my travel bag, and I didn't think too hard about what I was doing, because when I thought about it carefully, the feeling got complicated, and when I just let myself do it, the feeling was something closer to right than I'd felt in a very long time. That might have been the most important thing I ignored. The fact that I had to stop thinking in order to do it. Rowena was at the arrivals hall when I came through. She didn't have to be. I hadn't asked her to come, hadn't expected it. But there she was, holding a small handwritten sign with my name on it, which I found more touching than I'd like to admit. She'd taken the morning off work. She said she wanted me to feel welcome. She said it simply, the way she said most things. I am not a man who cries in airports, but I came closer than I have in years. Jasmine had made me a card, drawn it herself, crayon on white paper. A picture of what I think was supposed to be Ireland on one side and the Philippines on the other, connected by a blue line which I assume was the aeroplane route. Inside, she'd written, "Welcome back, Mr. Nile," in careful block letters, and underlined it twice. Rowena handed it to me in the grab on the way to the hotel, and I held it in my lap the whole way, and looked out the window at Cebu going past. The first few days of that second visit were easy, in the way that things are easy when you've already decided. Rowena's mother came up from Bohol on the second day. Small woman, mid-60s, quiet. She shook my hand with both of her hands and said something to Rowena in Cebuano that Rowena translated as, "She says she is very grateful." The mother had obviously had the eye operation. She moved around confidently, none of the careful, tentative movement of someone with poor vision. She pressed my hand again before she left. I thought, I did a real thing for this family. Whatever else is complicated, that part was real. The ring was in the inside pocket of my travel bag, wrapped in a small piece of cloth. I'd put it there in Limerick, and I hadn't moved it. I'd chosen a restaurant by then, a place called Abaca, out toward the Mactan area, the kind of place where you make a reservation in advance, and they bring the bread before you ask for it. I'd looked at it online. I'd even thought about how the conversation would go. Not scripted, nothing like that. I'm not the sort. But I had a general shape in my head. I knew roughly what I wanted to say. 3 weeks, I told myself. Give it a few weeks. Let it feel natural. I noticed her phone in the first week. This is the thing I have to be honest about, because I wasn't honest with myself about it at the time. Her phone buzzed more than I remembered. Not constantly, but regularly. And whenever it buzzed, she'd glance at it and turn it face down without explanation. Everyone's on their phone. That was my reasoning. I was on mine. Doesn't mean anything. Once, walking back from a warung near the Mabalo district where we'd had lunch. Good sinigang, pork. The sourness of it was still in the back of my throat. Her phone went off 3 times in quick succession while she was in the toilet. I didn't look at it. I made a point of not looking at it. I thought, looking at it would mean I don't trust her. And I trusted her. So I didn't look. I think about that now. The deliberateness of not looking. A mechanic who decides not to check a component because checking it might reveal a fault he doesn't want to deal with. That's not trust. That's something else. There was one afternoon, about 10 days in, when she'd said she had to go to work. I had no reason to doubt this. I walked down to Ayala later, just to get out of the hotel. Wanted to pick up some paracetamol from Watson's. The heat was giving me headaches. And I walked past the kiosk. She wasn't there. A young man I hadn't seen before was behind the counter, handling a booking. I stood for a moment, then walked on. She had a deputy. People take time off. It could have been her day off, and she'd forgotten to mention it. There were 20 reasonable explanations, and I went through about 15 of them on the walk back. I didn't ask her about it that evening. The Tagalog, I should explain how that happened, because it's the part people find hardest to believe. I didn't study it. I have no aptitude for languages in the traditional sense, never have. But I have a very good ear for mechanical patterns, and language, it turns out, is a kind of pattern. After 7 months of video calls with Rowena, of sitting in cafes and markets and streets where the language moved around me constantly, I'd absorbed more than I realized. Not enough to hold a conversation, but enough to follow one if I was paying attention and the speakers were talking about things I'd heard the words for before. Pera, money. That word I'd heard dozens of times. Mahal, love or expensive. Same word, which I'd always found interesting. Isa, dalawa, tatlo, 1, 2, 3. I knew numbers, and I knew yung isa, the other one. I'd heard that phrase once on a video call, months earlier, in a conversation Rowena was having with someone else, and she'd quickly switched to English when she saw me watching the screen. I'd registered it, and filed it, and forgotten it. I said nothing to her about any of this. I don't know why, exactly. Maybe it felt like something to keep. A small piece of information that was mine, that she didn't know I had. That's not a flattering thing to admit about myself, but there it is. I was happy those first 2 weeks. Genuinely happy, in the quiet, specific way that doesn't announce itself. I slept well for the first time in a long time. The heat agreed with me in a way I wouldn't have predicted. I had a purpose, which was this woman and this child, and this life I was building in my head around them. And purpose is a thing I had gone a very long time without. The ring sat in its cloth in my travel bag. The restaurant reservation I was building toward in my mind. The conversation I'd imagined, in fragments, at different times of the day. And underneath all of it, quiet as an oil leak, the things I hadn't examined. The phone, the kiosk, the forum post I hadn't bookmarked. The question about the annulment I'd never actually asked to see documentation for. I'd taken her word for it being in progress because I'd wanted to take her word for it. A machine that runs quietly can still be failing. The silence isn't reassurance. Sometimes the silence is the problem. But I didn't know that yet. Or rather, I knew it, and chose not to apply it. Then Rowena suggested the trip to Oslob. The drive to Oslob is about 2 hours south of Cebu City, down the coast road. It's a good road, mostly. You go through Karkar, through Bareilly, the sea appearing and disappearing on your left, between the hills and the coconut palms, and the small barangay houses with their corrugated roofs. I'd wanted to see the whale sharks since before the first trip. It's one of the things Cebu is known for. They congregate off the Oslob coast, and for a fee, you can get in the water with them. Rowena knew I'd want to go. She arranged a driver she knew. Boy, she called him. A lot of Filipino men go by nicknames like that. It's common enough. Mid-40s, easy manner, minimal English beyond the basics. Good driver, I noticed that immediately. He handled the coastal road well, which has some sharp bends. I always notice how people drive. 30 years around heavy machinery gives you an eye for competence. I sat in the back. Rowena was in the passenger seat. I had the window down part way despite the air conditioning. I like to hear a road while I'm on it. The air smelled of salt and exhaust, and something green and damp from the hills. I watched the sea. About an hour in, her phone started buzzing. She answered it, turned slightly toward the window, spoke low and quick in Tagalog. This in itself wasn't unusual. She took calls in Tagalog all the time. I kept watching the coast. A tricycle pulled out of a side road ahead of us, and Boy slowed and waited for it. Patient, no horn. I was listening without meaning to listen. That's the honest way to put it. I wasn't straining for it. I just heard it, the way you hear a diesel engine running rough in a machine that's supposed to run smooth. Not because you're looking for it, but because you've trained yourself to notice when something sounds wrong. Pera pa. More money. Kailangan niya. He needs it. And then, clearly, unmistakably, yung isa. The other one. I kept my eyes on the window. I did not move. I am a man who has spent decades not reacting until he understands what he's dealing with. And that reflex, not the emotional one, the professional one, is apparently still in me. I filed what I'd heard, stored it, kept watching the coast. Then Boy glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw what he expected to see. A quiet foreign man looking out the window, elsewhere, not following anything. And he said to Rowena, in Tagalog, in the tone of a man offering practical advice to someone who might need reminding, "Tapusin mo na, yung matanda." Finish the old man. Rowena made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite agreement, something between them, and changed the subject. The call ended. She said something light in English about the whale sharks, asking if I was excited. I said yes. I was looking at the sea. I want to tell you that I felt something dramatic in that moment, but I didn't. Or if I did, I couldn't access it, because a different part of me had already taken over, the part that diagnoses, the part that says, you have a fault. Now find its extent. Don't react yet. Don't do anything until you know the full picture. The whale sharks were extraordinary, I'll say that. They're not like anything you expect. The size of them, the way they move through the water with that slow, total indifference. I got in the water and floated next to one for about 3 minutes, and it regarded me with one enormous eye, and moved on. Rowena took photographs from the boat. I smiled in them. I ate lunch at a small place near the water. Grilled fish, rice, a San Miguel that I drank slowly. I was pleasant. I made conversation. Nobody in that car, on that boat, at that lunch table, knew anything had changed. We drove back in the late afternoon. I watched the same coast in reverse. Boy drove the same competent way. Rowena was warm and easy and talked about places she wanted to show me before I left. I agreed to everything. I was very calm. That evening, I told her I was tired from the sun and would have an early night. She kissed me on the cheek at the hotel entrance and said to rest well, and she'd message me in the morning. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed. And then I did what I do. I went through the evidence systematically, without mercy. The way I would go through a machine that had failed to determine how long it had been failing and how badly. 7 months of messenger conversations. I scrolled through them on my phone with the systematic attention of someone looking for a specific fault, not browsing. The timing of the requests. I'd been aware of each one individually. School fees, uniforms, monthly transfers, the eye operation. But I'd never laid them all out in sequence before. When I did, the pattern was obvious. Each request came after a week of unusual warmth. More calls than usual, longer calls, more of everything. Then the request, then gratitude, then back to the normal rhythm. Then another week of warmth. Then the next request. It was a maintenance cycle, as regular as any machine I'd ever worked on. The annulment. I thought about what I actually knew about the annulment. She'd mentioned it on the first day, said it was in progress. I'd nodded and accepted this as information, and never once, in 7 months, asked for a document, a case number, a lawyer's name, anything tangible. I'd taken it on trust, because I'd wanted to take it on trust, and because, I see this now, it wasn't in her interest to volunteer proof of anything she hadn't been asked to prove. I went back to the Cebu expat Facebook groups. This time I searched differently. Not vaguely, not scrolling. I searched for kiosk, Ayala, tour, and read everything that came up going back 2 years. 3 separate threads. Different men, different dates, same pattern. Professional woman at a tour kiosk. Never asked for anything directly. Monthly support arrangements. Medical emergencies for family members. One man from Antwerp mentioned specifically that he'd sent money for a cataract operation for her mother. His words, 60,000 pesos. The hospital was in Tagbilaran. I sat with that for a while. I'm not a man who cries easily, and I didn't cry then. What I felt was more specific than that. The particular cold feeling of a man who has trusted his own judgment his whole life, and finds that the instrument he relied on was not faulty exactly, but had been pointed in the wrong direction. I'd been reading the machine correctly. I'd read every signal she gave me with reasonable accuracy. The problem was that I'd chosen which signals to read and which ones to set aside, and I'd made those choices based on what I wanted the diagnosis to be, rather than what the data suggested. That's not her failure. That's mine. And that, more than anything, is what I've had to sit with since. I closed the phone. I looked at the ceiling for a while. Outside, somewhere down the street, someone was singing karaoke. A ballad, badly pitched but committed, the way karaoke always is in this country, with a kind of total unself-conscious feeling that I found, even then, strangely admirable. I didn't sleep much, but by morning I knew exactly what I was going to do. I booked the earlier flight the next morning. Told the airline I had a family matter. No drama, no scene. One just moved the dates and paid the change fee. And that was done. I had 4 days left in Cebu. I spent them the same way I'd spent the previous 2 weeks, more or less. We went to dinner once, at a place near IT Park she liked, good grilled pork belly, lambanog for her, another San Miguel for me. I was pleasant, attentive. I asked about Jasmine's upcoming school term. I listened to everything she said. I was, I think, the best version of myself at the dinner table that I have ever been, because none of it cost me anything anymore, and I had nothing left to protect. I didn't confront her. I want to be clear about that because some people, when I've told this story, think I should have. Should have put it all on the table, made her account for it, got some kind of admission, some closing of the loop. But here's what I know about confronting a broken machine. It doesn't repair it. You can stand in front of a failed hydraulic system and shout at it, and the hydraulic system will not explain itself to you. You document the fault, you make the system safe, and you remove yourself from the situation. That's the procedure. Confrontation is for people who need something from the other party. An apology, an explanation, a reaction. I didn't need any of those things. I needed to leave cleanly and keep what was mine. On the last morning, she saw me off at the hotel entrance. She said she'd miss me, said she'd call when I landed. She looked, I don't know. She looked exactly the way she always looked. I've thought about that a lot, whether she knew, whether she suspected, whether she sensed something different in me those last 4 days. I genuinely can't tell you. She was composed and warm and said the right things. Maybe that's just who she is. Maybe she's good at it. Maybe both things are true, and neither one cancels the other out. I took a grab to Mactan. At Dublin Airport, after I'd cleared arrivals and collected my bag and found a seat in the terminal cafe with a coffee I didn't particularly want, I opened Messenger for the last time. I typed one message. I understand more than you knew. Mind yourself, I read it once, sent it, and then blocked every account. Messenger, WhatsApp, Gcash, Facebook, every point of contact I had for her. Took about 6 minutes in total. She never got a chance to reply, or if she did, it went nowhere. I don't know what she would have said. I find I don't need to know. The day after I got home, I went back to Curran's Jewelers on O'Connell Street. The same man who'd sold me the ring was behind the counter. I put it on the glass and told him I wouldn't be needing it. He asked no questions. He gave me back what I'd paid. I walked out, and it was raining. Because it's always raining in Limerick in November. And that was that. Now, the numbers, because I think they matter, and you should hear them clearly. School fees, 18,000 pesos, about 295 euros. Uniforms and supplies, 12,000 pesos, about 195 euros. 5 months of monthly transfers at 25,000 pesos each. 125,000 pesos, about 2,050 euros. Cataract operation, 60,000 pesos, about 980 euros. Smaller bits. Meals I paid for. A few gifts I'd brought as pasalubong on the second trip. A taxi here and there that I covered without thinking. Total somewhere around 310,000 pesos. Just over 5,200 euros. I have 149,000 euros left. I know that number. I check it. Against what it could have been. Against what it would have been if I'd proposed, and she'd said yes, and I'd spent the next 2 years funding a life in Cebu that wasn't what it appeared to be. 5,200 euros is nothing. That is the correct mathematical assessment, and I stand by it. But I want to be honest with you about what it actually cost, because the money is the smaller part. It cost me 4 months of believing I was a person someone had chosen. Not chosen for what was in my account, not chosen out of loneliness or convenience or strategy, but chosen. The way Mereyad chose me, for reasons I never fully understood and never needed to. That feeling, that specific feeling, was the thing I'd been without for 7 years. And I got it back, briefly. And then I found out I hadn't got it back at all. I'd just rented the sensation of it. And the rental agreement had terms I hadn't read. It cost me Jasmine's welcome card, which I still have, actually, which is, I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. The card was real. She drew it herself. Whatever else was happening, that child drew a map of Ireland and the Philippines and wrote, "Welcome back, Mr. Nile," and underlined it twice, and that was a real thing that happened, and I find I can't bring myself to throw it away. What I'd do differently. You'll want to know this. Here's what I'd do differently. I'd learn the language properly, not fragments from 7 months of passive listening. An actual course before I went. Cebuano, at minimum, some Tagalog. 30 years as a mechanic taught me that you cannot diagnose a system you don't understand the language of. I understood that about machines. I should have applied it sooner. I'd ask for documentation. The annulment had a case number, a lawyer, a court somewhere. Those things exist and can be verified. I accepted her word for it because asking for documentation felt like distrust, and I didn't want to be the kind of man who didn't trust. I should have been exactly that kind of man. I wouldn't have mistaken the absence of demands for the absence of an agenda. That's the one that cost me most. She never asked. I thought that was the proof. It's not. It's just a more sophisticated version of the same thing. A machine that runs quietly can still be failing. Silence isn't reassurance. Sometimes silence is the problem. I'm in Limerick now. The flat I'm renting is fine. Smaller than the house, quieter, no kitchen radio. I watch the Philippines videos sometimes, late at night. Not as often as before. I haven't ruled anything out, is what I tell myself. I'm a careful man. Next time, I'll be careful in the right direction. That's all I've got. And that's where we leave Niall Connolly. Back in Limerick, 149,000 euros intact, a ring returned, and a hard-won education that cost him just over 5,000 euro and several months of something that felt, while it lasted, like being alive again. I want to say something before we go, because this story deserves it. Neil lost 5,200 euros. By the standards of what this channel has documented, men who lost their life savings, their homes, their retirement, their dignity, that's a modest number. Some of you watching have lost 10 times that. Some of you are in the middle of losing it right now, and you're watching this from a hotel room in Cebu or Angeles or Dumaguete, telling yourselves it's different with her. She's not like the others. She never asks for anything. Here's what Niall's story tells us that those bigger, louder stories sometimes miss. The amount of money you lose is not the measure of how close you came to disaster. Niall was 3 weeks from proposing. 3 weeks from a ring on her finger. From the entanglement deepening into something legal and permanent. From a story that would have looked very different by the time it appeared on this channel. What saved him wasn't caution. He'd already let that go. What saved him was a driver who glanced in a rearview mirror and assumed the quiet man in the back seat wasn't listening. That's a very thin margin. Most men don't get it. If you're planning your first trip to the Philippines, or your second, or you're already sending Gcash monthly to someone you met at a kiosk, or a cafe, or a mall, ask yourself one honest question. Not whether she loves you, not whether it feels real. Ask yourself this: have you verified a single thing you've been told? Her marital status, her family situation, the emergencies that required your help, any of it. Because a relationship that can't survive honest questions isn't a relationship. It's a comfort you're renting, and the terms of the rental are not in your favor. That doesn't mean everyone is lying. Some aren't. The Philippines is full of genuine people living genuine lives with genuine needs, and the cultural expectation of family support is real. It's not invented for foreign consumption. But genuine people can verify things. Genuine situations have documentation. Genuine relationships survive curiosity. Niall learned that. He learned it the hard way, at a cost of €5,200 and one returned ring, and the particular grief of a man who briefly felt less alone, and then found out the feeling had been carefully constructed. He's careful now, in the right direction. This has been Inside the Philippines. Take care of yourselves out there.